Good morning. My name is Jana Hexter, and I'm with the Northeastern IPM Center based in Ithaca, New York, and Cornell University. My pleasure to welcome you this morning. It's a beautiful day here, lovely and warm and sunny and a little bit windy. And our presentation today is pesticide label changes brought on by the Endangered Species Act. And we have four presenters. Actually, one person is presenting and three are going to be fielding questions. So we have lots of capacity for questions. They are Krishna Naranjana, Bill Chisholm, Mark Van Gessel, and Kurt Vollmer, and I will introduce them in a moment. Next slide, please. First, I would like to acknowledge that this presentation is supported by the Northeastern IPM Center through a project award from USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Crop Protection and Pest Management Regional Coordination Program, so that is USDA NIFR. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this publication or this presentation are those of the authors and shouldn't be construed to represent any official USDA or US government determination or policy. And next slide, please. The webinar will end at noon, and there is live transcription available, which you can select in your toolbar and in Zoom. It is being recorded, and the recording will be available in about a week. We do some editing, we put together the slides and the Q&A responses, and it's available on our website. And anyone who is registered will receive a copy of the recording. So sometime next week, you'll get an email from me with a link to the recording on our website, or you can just come back to our website and go to the toolbox and you'll see the recording there. Next slide, please. We have over 270 people registered for this webinar, and we have 148 people signed on at the moment, so there's a lot of you. We are excited that you're here, but to make it easier for us to handle your questions, we ask that you don't put them into the chat feature. If you can use the Q&A feature. So on your Zoom bar, you should see a box with a question mark in it, and it says Q&A. And if you click on that, you can ask a question. There's also a check mark where you can ask anonymously, and that will allow us to see the questions as they come in. And it also helps us to see if there's, two or three people asking the same question. We can prioritize asking that one at the breaks. We have 2 breaks scheduled for answering questions. So there's plenty of time for that. Plus we have 3 people here who are monitoring that Q&A feature. Thank you. All right, next slide, please. So we have 4 presenters. The first is Niranjana Krishnan. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Entomology at the University of Maryland, College Park. She also serves as Maryland's Pesticide Safety Education Program Coordinator. Her research focuses on assessing the risks of pesticide exposures to insects. Her extension work is focused on changes to pesticide labels due to recent changes in implementation of the Endangered Species Act. And our next presenter is Bill Chisholm. He's the chair of the Endangered Species Act Committee for the Weed Science Society of America. He has a PhD in weed science. He grew up on a working vegetable farm in California, and he also worked in California for the Extension Service, a pesticide manufacturer, and has worked for over 20 years at OPP before his retirement. Welcome, Bill. Our next presenter is Mark Van Gessel. He is the extension weed scientist at the University of Delaware and a faculty member in the Plant and Soil Department. His extension and research focus is on integrated weed management for herbicide-resistant weeds, as well as the intersection of weed ecology and weed management. He works with grain crops as well as with commercial vegetables. And our final presenter is Kurt Vollmer, who's extension weed management specialist at the University of Maryland. His research focuses on evaluating different weed management tactics. His extension program focuses on disseminating weed control and other relevant information to growers and other constituents. So we have a deep well of expertise on this panel today. and we are grateful to have you all here. Thank you. So the next slide is we have a few questions for you. So you should see a poll pop up on your screen. If you don't see a poll pop up on your screen, don't worry about it. Some devices do not have those. But you should see 4 simple questions, and it's helpful for the presenters to see who's here and what your level of expertise or your background is so that they can tailor the presentation to your needs. And I'll just be quiet while you answer those questions for us. Great, and I can share the results with you. Excuse me. So we can see here that what describes your profession. We have a good mix of people, actually. And you can see there's actually kind of a very even mix on the call today, including 8% of farmers and growers. So we're happy to have you here in the spring growing season. What crops do you primarily grow? And actually, that is also a pretty even mix. Slightly more field crops and then how knowledgeable are you about the pesticide changes? That is also a pretty even mix. And how impacted do you feel that you will be? And most of that is in somewhat moderately or very impacted. And so there we go. I will stop sharing the results. There we go. All right. So with that, we will move into the presentation and take it away, Kurt.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for being here this morning. So first of all, why are we all here? The Endangered Species Act. It was first passed in 1973, over 50 years ago. And the Endangered Species Act affects us because it requires government agencies such as the EPA to ensure that any actions they take will not jeopardize endangered species or their listed habitats. Now, according to the statute, the ESA is enforced by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services and National Marine Fisheries Services. When EPA registers a pesticide, it assesses the risk of that pesticide for harming an endangered species or their habitat and consults the services as needed. If there is any potential harm, then the agency will modify the labels as needed to mitigate risk. So why are we talking about this now? You know, though ESA was passed in 1973, EPA only undertook these ESA assessments for pesticide registrations and re-registrations fewer than 5% of the time. This resulted in a lot of lawsuits with a mega suit settlement in September of 2023. Now, currently, there are over 1,700 species on the endangered species list. The majority of these being plants, and as a weed scientist, it does concern me that we have potentially over 900 species that could be impacted by herbicides, and we have over 850 species that are potentially impacted by insecticides. Now, before you think that there aren't any endangered species around me, most counties in the U.S. have at least one endangered species. Here you can see a density map, the yellow representing a low density of endangered species, while the dark blue representing a high density of endangered species. If you're watching this webinar from New York, where the IPM Center is, here's another example of a statewide map that actually shows you the number of endangered species in that state. And as you can see, every single county has at least one, and some have, of course, have more than others. So with this fact, EPA has to mitigate and work with endangered species in order to, protect them and their habitats. And this can get complicated. However, really, EPA only had 3 options for protecting endangered species. Their first option was, to remove the pesticide from US marketplace. Any pesticide that could have impacted a listed species or their habitat would have been removed. The second option was to restrict a pesticide use to only crops and sites where that endangered species wasn't located or there was no critical habitat. But if you look at the map on your slide, you can see, there's a lot of critical habitat still around the country. And that would have, again, completely removed using certain pesticides in those areas. But their third option was to add mitigations to labels to protect species. This minimizes the number of impacted users and allows use in multiple crop sites, even though some of these endangered species still may be present. So a question you want to ask yourself is, would you prefer to not have access to the product or have access to it with some restrictions and mitigations? So pesticide labels will be changing to protect endangered and threatened species. A few labels have changed and more changes will be coming as time progresses. Again, these changes are going to be slow as these pesticides are registered and re-registered. It's not going to be a one-time thing. It's going to happen slowly over time. For example, a new glufosinate formulation, Liberty Ultra, which I'll be referring to a lot in this presentation, is the first herbicide label to be changed to reflect these new mitigation strategies. And again, these pesticide changes are ongoing, but changes would take up to 15 plus years, again, as these pesticides are being registered and re-registered. Separate strategies for individual pesticide types are also forthcoming. They should have similar mitigation requirements. The herbicide strategy was just finalized last year in 2024. The rodenticide strategy was finalized in 2024, but I think there's been some modifications. The insecticide strategy, I believe, was just released yesterday. My fellow panelists can give you some more information on that. And the fungicide strategy will be released in 2026. So there are three types of label changes that are possible, three things that you'll probably see on these new pesticide labels. These will consist of pesticide use limitation areas, specific geographic areas where endangered species can be found and where mitigations will take place, as well as mitigations to reduce spray drift and mitigations to reduce runoff and erosion. Now, it's also important to mention that these ESA mitigations are really only currently for conventional agricultural use only. And these mitigations have to be determined for each field rather than an entire farm with multiple fields. Required spray buffer and runoff mitigation will also be different for each herbicide crop combinations. And these mitigations will likely appear on three places. First, they will appear on the product label. The product label may also direct a user to go to the Bulletins Live 2 website, and the label may also redirect the user to the EPA's mitigation menu webpage. So if you're an applicator, you're planning on spraying a pesticide, what's the first things you're going to search for when you're looking for these new label mitigations? Starting with the first thing that should be checked on the new labels is any reference to Bulletins Live 2. Bulletins Live 2 is going to be what tells you where your pesticide limitation area is. And the information on Bulletins Live 2 is going to trump any other mitigations listed on the label. Bulletins Live 2, basically just identifies these pesticide use limitation areas, these geographic areas critical to conserving a species, and adds a buffer of about 1,000 feet or less to account for, potential offsite movement of that pesticide on a treated field. If a field is in a PULA, the use of certain pesticides may be restricted, even if the label says that pesticide is still allowed, or additional mitigations may be required, such as the expansion of that spray drift buffer. If Bulletin's Live 2 shows your field outside of a PULA, it's still within your best interest to document that there are no limitations within the month of your pesticide application. And you can always check Bulletin's Live 2 up to 6 months before your application. Now, there are several different ways that you can actually utilize Bulletin's Live 2, and I have the website pulled up here. So the simplest way to utilize Bulletin's Live 2 is to just enter your application month and zoom into the area you're interested in. And you may or may not see a pink shaded in area, and this represents a pesticide use limitation area, or PULA. And whenever you use this website, what you want to do is zoom in enough to where you see this green button, which will give you a printable bulletin. You will also see the particular pesticide limitations for a selected area. And this one actually just happens to deal with those over-the-top dicamba products, which are currently not labeled to spray anyway. But you can get full details about what additional mitigations you have to apply for if you were to apply this pesticide, such as increasing your spray drift buffer. But the important thing to know about Bulletin's Live 2 and this green button is once you click it, you will actually get a bulletin that you can download. Sometimes the bulletin is going to be blank. It's not going to have any mitigations that you have to follow. Sometimes it's going to provide additional mitigation measures. Other ways to use Bulletin's Live 2 is if you're looking for any information on a specific pesticide. So say if we are looking at finding information on using Liberty Ultra in New York, here we see our search results for Ithaca, and we see that we are not in a PULA. And if I were to print that bulletin out, it will give me the same information. There is no PULA to exist, but you want to have that bulletin with you to show, again, that within 6 months of your application, there is no restrictions on your applying that pesticide. So here's just an example of kind of what these bulletins will look like. You'll have a general map of your area and any potential mitigations. And with that, we'll pause and answer any questions you may have.
Great. We have 2 questions so far. One is, what will be the impact on microbial pesticides and biochemical pesticides?
Yeah, this Bill Chisholm, if I can answer that one. Currently, the Office of Pesticide Programs is not proposing to deal with those types of pesticides. So I think they're anticipating the impacts are low. They're putting it way down on their list of things to keep busy with.
Okay. All right, thank you. And the other question is, do you anticipate any potential changes or rollbacks to these changes under the current administration?
This Bill Chisholm, I'll try that one too. A, who knows with the current administration? B, as Kurt pointed out, the EPA is releasing the insecticide strategy. I think if they anticipated there were going to be major changes, they would have held that up. So they're releasing that. So I think the current administration is preparing itself to continue looking at ways to protect endangered species.
All right, thank you. And another question, would the information from the BLT Live website be something applicators should have in the field along with pesticide labels?
Yes. The bulletin is part of the label. If the label directs you to Bulletins Live 2 to obtain a bulletin, you must have that bulletin with you when you're applying the pesticide.
Great. And those were all the questions we had for the moment. So I suggest that we continue on, and I'm sure there'll be other questions by the end of the presentation.
All right. So the next potential mitigation step is spray drift. And here is just an example of what a label would look like and how it will inform you of specific procedures you need to take to mitigate off-target spray drift for. So ground applicators, aerial applicators. It'll also list mandatory spray drift buffers. In this case, Liberty Ultra has an aerial spray drift buffer distance of 50 feet and a ground buffer distance of 10 feet. Now, these spray drift buffers are on a percent scale, and these buffers are downwind only, and they're designed to protect unmanaged areas. But, managed areas outside of the treated area can be considered as a buffer as well. Anything such as an agricultural field, roads, CRP lands, and mowed areas. There are actually over 15 ways that you can use to reduce your buffer distance. And some applications don't really need buffers, such as, spot treatments, tree injections, or chemigation. Now, here is a list from EPA's herbicide strategy on ways to reduce buffer distance, either by modifying your application parameters, by reducing your single application rate, raising or lowering your boom height, or using nozzles that help reduce drift, such as your coarse droplet nozzles. The important thing to remember about these spray drift mitigation measures are these measures are additive. So if you pick something from this list that reduces your spray drift buffer distance by 75%, and you pick something else that reduces your spray drift buffer distance by 25%, then you've effectively completely eliminated your spray drift buffer. And I'm going to go through a couple of examples. One of them is, to reduce the number of passes in your field. And this example here, this ground applicator only made 4 passes in his field. According to our table, that gives us at least a 35% reduction in our spray drift buffer. Another example, looking at our 50-foot buffer requirement for cropped areas versus non-cropped areas in a field. In the image at the top, you see that we need to maintain at least a 50-foot buffer distance. We have an infield buffer of about 20 feet, CRP ground of about 10 feet, and a windbreak of about 20 feet, protecting our critical habitat. If we were to expand that CRP ground, as in the image below, we see that, we have CRP ground of 20 feet and a windbreak of 30 feet, effectively giving us that 50-foot buffer and meeting our requirements. Last thing I want to point out about buffers is, the Liberty Ultra label does list specific criteria for having those, windbreak and shelter break areas. In order to get credit for a buffer reduction, All of these shelter break areas must be downwind of the application and run the full length of the treated area. Also, these areas must have dense foliage. You cannot see the non-managed area from the upwind side, and all these areas, for example, need to be planted to CRP standards and maintained for functionality. Now, when you talk about tree height, species number, and other factors, you can get either a 75% or 50% reduction. 50% reduction would be if you have your tree height would be the same height or above the application release height. But if that buffer and if the trees in that buffer are greater than or equal to 2 times the application release height, you're going to get a 75% reduction. Species number, basically, the more species you have, the greater reduction in buffer distance you have. For example, 1 row of trees is going to give you about a 50% reduction, but more than 2 rows of trees or shrubs is going to give you about a 75% reduction. Any type of man-made structure, same thing as tree height. Same height or above the application is going to give you a 50% reduction, whereas if it's twice the application height, it's going to give you about a 75% reduction in release height. Now, some labels will spray drift mitigations. Adding drift reducing adjuvants will help reduce that buffer. You know, for ground boom applications with Liberty Ultra, as we saw earlier, there's a 10-foot downwind buffer, but this buffer can be reduced to 0 with the use of an oil emulsion drift reducing adjuvant applied at 2.5% of the volume. For aerial applications, that 50% or that 50-foot buffer can also be reduced by applying that drift reducing adjuvant at about 2.5% of the volume. And the last mitigation we want to talk about is, ways to mitigate pesticide runoff. And this actually relies on a point system. So all of these labels are going to tell you that you must achieve a certain number of points to use the pesticide labeled on the crops listed. In this case, with Liberty Ultra, 3 points. Now, this point system is designed to protect listed species and their critical habitat about 1,000 feet downslope. Some areas outside the treated area can be included in that 1,000 feet, things such as ag fields, roads, gravel surfaces, field buffers, buildings, etc. Herbicides, the number of points that you need to get for pesticide runoff mitigation will depend on the particular herbicide and the crop it's being sprayed on. The number of points that you will need to get will range from 0 to 9. There are over 40 ways to reduce these mitigations. And again, some applications really don't need these mitigation points, such as, again, spot treatments, tree injections, or any field that has permanent berms or tailwater return systems. And as I just mentioned, the number of points you need to get with a certain pesticide will determine, what crop you're spraying it in. For example, if we look at the metolachlor column, we see that for corn and cotton, we're looking at a proposed 6 mitigation points, whereas other grains may only have to achieve 1 mitigation point. And as far as mitigations go, they are, put in several categories by location, field characteristics, in-field measures, field adjacent measures, as well as other various ways you can mitigate these any potential runoff or any potential runoff from pesticides. So just a few examples of what are these mitigation release. So first one is location or county-based runoff. So EPA actually analyzed the runoff vulnerability of counties across the low rate 48 states to determine their rainfall and soil and other lines of evidence that might show that, they have a high or low potential for runoff. Areas with higher runoff potential will require more mitigation points than areas with low runoff potential. So county-based relief points, if you're in an area where you can get them, are basically free. Here we can see county-based relief points for both New Jersey and New York. Areas in red are designated as having high runoff vulnerability. Unfortunately, if you're farming in those areas, you're not going to get that free mitigation points. Areas in yellow, you'll actually get 2 mitigation points. Areas in blue, you'll actually get 3 mitigation points. So again, if you remember, you need 3 mitigation points to spray Liberty Ultra. And if you happen to be living in one of those areas that are in blue, you've automatically got your 3 mitigation points. Field characteristics basically depend on your field slopes and your soil type. If your field slope is less than or equal to 3%, then you're going to get 2 points. Predominantly sandy soils, you're also going to get 2 mitigation points. End-field measures, things like utilizing conservation tillage, no tillage, reduced and no tillage is automatically going to, again, give you 3 mitigation points. Any type of reduced tillage, ridge tillage, strip tillage is also going to give you 2 mitigation points. If you plant a cover crop or you have a continuous ground cover, you're going to get mitigation points as well. Even if you plant a cover crop and till it under in the spring, you're still going to get 1 mitigation point, but you leave that cover crop on the ground, the more mitigation points you get. Other field adjacent measures, if you have a grass waterway, that's going to give you 2 mitigation points. Having vegetative strips in your field, depending on their width, are either going to give you 1, 2, 3 mitigation points. Same things with a vegetative ditch or a riparian forest buffer. The larger the area, the more mitigation points you're going to get. Pesticide-specific mitigation, one way to get additional mitigation points is to reduce the annual application rate. And when I talk about reducing the annual application rate, I'm not talking about, putting, not following the label recommended rate to control a weed. For example, the Liberty Ultra label says you have an annual application rate of 58 fluid ounces per acre. In a single application, you can apply 29 fluid ounces. And you can apply 2 applications of Liberty Ultra a year. If you only make 1 application at that 29 fluid per ounce rate, you've already reduced your application rate, your annual application rate, by about 50%, and you automatically get those 2 mitigation points. You also get mitigation points again for reducing the proportion of your field treated, say in a banded application, and if you actually incorporate that herbicide into the soil. Other ways that you can get mitigation points are simply by mitigation tracking. If you document the number of points you're collecting at either the field or farm level using some type of paper or electronic format, and EPA has actually released a very handy mitigation calculator tool that we will share with you. If you work with a specialist to follow their mitigation recommendations, you'll also get 1 point. Or you can participate in a qualifying conservation reserve program to achieve these mitigation points. And if you happen to, use mitigation from multiple categories, such as one in-field measure or one field adjacent measure, you will also get an extra free mitigation point. So ESA, this is a lot to wrap your head around, I know, but ESA has been successful with, over 99% of these listed species still alive, and, over 291 species have been delisted. So ESA compliance, will it go away? Not likely. State agencies will probably be most likely be the ones to enforce these labels, and each state is going to be the ones to decide the best way to do that. And it's not really going to go away. ESA has been around for over 50 years, and any modifications to this Endangered Species Act would require some type of bipartisan support. So, in conclusion, it's really important as these new labels come out to work collaboratively, especially if you're not farming your own land. If you're a commercial applicator or a custom applicator, you really want to work with your clients to make sure they have all the requirements in place for you to spray the pesticide you want to. This process, again, it's slow, it's still evolving. It's not going to happen instantly tomorrow. Any state-specific information, you really need to consult your state agency and your state lead contact person. So with that, I'd like to share, here's some resources we've used to develop this presentation. A lot of good information, especially, the Bulletins Live 2 website, the EPA mitigation menu website provides a lot of good information on what you need to, and more in-depth information on these pesticide label mitigations. Just one more, here's an example, here's a QR code to take you to the EPA and main endangered species main page, which will hopefully give you some more information. And I would like to acknowledge that the design of this presentation has been a collaborative effort between all the individuals on the slide, as well as all of my fellow panelists. And with that, I believe it's time for our next round of questions.
Whoops. Yes, it is indeed. And we have, oh, looks like Mark is actually typing an answer, but I'm going to read it anyway. On the spray drift mitigation, does the list shown apply to all pesticides, or do you just use the list on the specific herbicide label? Liberty Ultra only has a 10-foot buffer. Can that be reduced further with reduced rates, boom height, medium course DSD, or DRAs?
Since I started to type that, I'll answer that one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay, there we go. So the mitigations are going to be dependent on the crop in which it's being applied to, and the specific products. So it will vary across the different herbicides. So while Kurt used Liberty Ultra as an example, those mitigations were specific to Liberty Ultra, not to other pesticides.
But that list that I showed earlier, showing the different ways you could reduce mitigations, that list is part of the herbicide strategy and could be applied to multiple labels.
And Mark, did you want to answer this question from Jamie Scholar live, or did you want to type an answer to that?
I did type that into the to the response, but the question was it regarding diagonal wind? And how would that be interpreted? And to be honest, it may be that might be better with the state agencies as to how they're going to interpret that. What you know, we have a lot of irregular field edges here in the Mid-Atlantic region, so that's going to be something that we're going to have a more discussion with our regulatory agencies as to what is considered an edge when you don't have a straight line.
Mhm.
And that things like along that edge you may have a building which generally won't have quite the setback as, say, an adjacent agricultural field would have. So you might have mixtures of settings along the edge of that field, in which case it's probably going to be the most restrictive setting along that field. And that's going to be what's going to determine your mitigation.
All right, and just so you know, your typed answer doesn't seem to have shown up on my side. So maybe if you can just cut and paste that and email it to me, I'll make sure that it gets in the answers that are posted on our website. So, we have a question from Gregory Dahl. How do we find and promote successes of the program and show ways to win?
I'll take a stab at that. Great question, Greg. We've only seen two or three, I think three labels so far that talk about that have been reviewed for the Endangered Species Act. So we're hoping to see a few more so we can figure out a pattern and see some way. It's a great question, but see some way that we can tout how well things are working.
Okay, great. And we have a question from Emily May. Will you or others at the state level be tracking which runoff mitigations end up being chosen or used most frequently?
No, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
All right.
I don't know if other states have other plans, but in Maryland, we don't. It's more like, hoping to get these answers more through surveys rather than, at least, I don't know, the Department of Ag, in the record keeping, they could look at it, but I don't think anyone's working on compiling and trying to figure out which runoff measures are more likely to be implemented in the state, at least.
There's a question here from Matthew Caldwell. Liberty Ultra requires a medium course DSD. Can I get an additional buffer zone reduction for following what is already required by the label?
This Bill Chisholm again, the label anticipates you will be following that, so you would not get an additional reduction for doing something already required on the label.
Okay, great. Jeremy Markison asked, will the herbicide strategy look at applying herbicide in forested areas in the future?
Bill Chisholm, I'll try that one again. Great question. Currently, the herbicide strategy does not talk about non-agricultural areas, so we've been starting to think about what information could we collect to help the services think about mitigations in those areas. I know the U.S. Forest Service, other federal agencies look at and have some agreements with Fish and Wildlife Service in those non-ag areas. So we're hoping we can take some of those examples and correlate them with some additional mitigations to discuss with the services.
All right, and then we have one last question here. How will the applicator know whether buffers lie around the critical habitat or other species location area? When you employ mitigations that reduce the buffer size, how will you know where the new buffer lies? Will bulletins live tell you this? Farmers should be able to identify the area on fields if allowed.
I'll take a stab at that one. Kurt showed bulletins live too, and what comes up as a default is exactly what you saw, but you can move that to like a Google Earth feature, and within that Pula, see it down to the specific field to see if that field lies within the Pula or just, whether it's just outside the Pula area. So Bulletins Live 2 does allow the user to get more detail on specific fields.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, well, I think that is all the questions that we have in the Q&A, and we have a couple of things before we end. One is you should see another poll pop up on your screen. We would really appreciate it if the 164 people who are still here would just take a moment to answer those, and it would be helpful for us to see the impact of this presentation and how we might do things better in the future. Okay, I think everybody who was capable of responding to the poll has done so. I will end it, and you should be able to see the results now. Hopefully you do. As a result of this webinar, how knowledgeable are people? And we've moved up the scale a little bit there, with most people moderately and very knowledgeable. As a result of this webinar, how impacted do you think you might be by the ESA? And this actually doesn't look like it's changed very much, actually, to me, based on our initial poll. It'll be interesting to see when someone takes a look at the real numbers. And how likely are you to increase your implementation of conservation practices to meet the mitigation requirements? And that is very clear, actually. 40% are very likely, and another 30% are moderately likely or extremely likely. So that's 70% there. So thank you very much for answering those. I will also just share that we are, give me one moment here. There we go. Hopefully you can see that screen. We have another webinar coming up at the beginning of June on eco-friendly IPM approaches for codling moth management. And we look forward to that, and would be happy for you to join us if that is of interest to you. And if you would like to connect with colleagues around this issue or any other IPM issue, we encourage you to post a profile on this website about yourself and your work and who you're interested in connecting with. And then you can go to our Find a Colleague site and see people who have already posted their profiles there. It's a great way of finding like-minded people, and there's quite a few profiles up there already, including maybe some of the people that presented today. The recording of this will be available in about a week. You'll get an email from me with a link to the recording, or you can just come back to our website and you should see it posted. There'll also be a copy of the presentation materials and the Q&A responses in case you'd like to look more closely at some of the materials. And with that, that is the end of our slides and our presentation. I want to say thank you very, very much to everyone who turned up today. And thank you very, very much to our presenters for putting together such a great presentation and answering your questions. And hopefully this has given you more clarity than you had 55 minutes ago. So deep appreciation and gratitude to everyone who's here today. All right, bye-bye.